I discovered Fitz Hugh Ludlow's The Hasheesh Eater in the winter of 1975, maybe 1976. I was skating down the boardwalk in Venice, California, and I skated into this bookstore. And this book caught my eye on one of the shelves. It was silver, black Art Nouveau print, and this amazing collage on the front. So I picked up this book, and I discovered that the collage and the other artwork inside of the book was done by Satie, who was a very favorite artist of mine. I've been following him since 1966. And the book was astounding. You know, I was just taken with it. And I saw that it was edited by Michael Horowitz, who I later found out was one of the founding members of the Fitz Hugh Ludlow Memorial Library. Dave Singer, famous poster artist, helped Satie with the cover. And it was an amazing event to take this book home with me and sit back and read it. It was truly great. The combination of hallucinogenic writing and illustrations fed right into the life I was living then, as I was deeply involved with hashish at the time. There was an abundance of it from Morocco, Lebanon, and Afghanistan at that point, coming in on a steady basis. I would sit back with the book and read it whilst straight, high, and found that much of what Ludlow was describing in his 19th century way and Satie illustrating ran deep parallels with what I had and was experiencing in my use of this delightful ally. I had no idea at that time of what had prompted Ludlow's adventures, but found the tales beguiling. Perhaps a bit of Fitz Hugh Ludlow's life story is in order. Fitz's father, Henry, was a member of the clergy who started out to be a lawyer, got caught up in the second great awakening of evangelical Calvinism in 1820. He became active in both the temperance movement and the anti-slavery movements. He married Abby Wells and became a pastor of the Presbyterian Church in the early 1830s. Before Fitz was born, in September 1836, pro-slavery rioters in New York destroyed the family home. For their time, they were considered radical, and they were, very much so. Fitz Hugh's influences on the literature side was Thomas de Quincey, especially the Confessions of an Opium Eater, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Kubla Khan, or A Vision in a Dream, and Bayard Taylor, The Vision of Hasheesh, Chapter 10 in the Land of the Saracens. 21-year-old Fitz Hugh Ludlow became the best-selling author of The Hasheesh Eater in the years before the Civil War. His bestseller related his visionary experiences with large oral doses of hashish, along with his religious, philosophical, and medical reflections on the altered states they produced. He became a celebrated figure in the bohemian circles of New York City, along with such friends as Walt Whitman. He was a short story writer, a drama and music critic, and a journalist. He mingled with the high society of New York while dissolutely wandering among the disreputable, hard-drinking literati. Traveling west, he talked politics with Mormon leader Brigham Young and traded witticisms with Mark Twain in California. Ludlow later wrote perhaps the first great novel on the theme of alcohol abuse. He then became a leading expert in the treatment of opium addiction after the Civil War. He was a drinking buddy of Whitman and Twain, a New York bohemian of the 60s, the 1860s that is, pioneer psychedelic psychonaut, and frontier Pythagorean, America's first hashish eater and confessional junkie. A quote from Hakim Bey. One thing that we can establish about Fitz Hugh Ludlow is that he wrote the first trip reports in America. And if you've read perhaps airwood.org online, you'll see that lots of people do this now. But for instance, let me read you the very first one. Idola Theatre and the Prince of Wales, Whales. Waiting until the next day at evening, I took a moderate bolus, say 25 grains, and repaired to the theater. In the action of the pieces which were performed, I lived as really as I had ever lived in the world. With the fortunes of a certain adventurer in one of the plays, my mind so thoroughly associated with me that when he was led to the block and the headsman stood over him, I nerved myself for the final stroke and waited to feel the steel crash through my own neck. He was reprieved, and in his redemption, it was I who exulted. The effect of some written frescoing above the stage was to make me imagine myself in heaven. Yet imagine is not the proper word, for it does not express the cloudless conviction of reality which characterized this vision. There was no longer any forms or faces visible below me, but out of the wondrous rosy perspective of the upper paneling, angels came gliding as through corridors hewn of ruby and showered down rays of music, which were also beheld as rays of color. A most singular phenomenon occurred while I was intently listening to the orchestra, because it seems one of the most striking illustrations I have ever known of the preternatural activity of sense in the Hasheesh state and in an analytic direction. Seated side by side in the middle of the orchestra played two violinists. They were playing the same part was evident from their perfect uniformity in bowing. Their bows, though, through the whole piece, rose and fell simultaneously, keeping exact parallel. A chorus of wind and stringed instruments pealed on both sides of them, and the symphony was as perfect as possible. Yet amid all that harmonious blending, I was able to detect which note came from one violin and from which from the other, as distinctly as if the violinists had been playing at a distance of 100 feet apart and with no other instruments discoursing near them. According to a law of Hasheesh already mentioned, a very ludicrous hallucination came in to relieve the mind from its tense state. Just as the rapture of music, lights, and acting began to grow painful from excess, I felt myself losing all human proportions and spinning up to a tremendous height became Cleopatra's Needle. So, that was the very first trip report ever written in the United States. Fitz Hugh Ludlow's work with this book laid out structures for other people to follow along the way. I'm going to read a couple of quotes now from the book about his writing and about him. So the first quote is from Mark Twain. And if Fitz Hugh Ludlow, author of The Hasheesh Eater, comes your way, treat him well. He published a high encomium upon Mark Twain, the same being eminently just and truthful. I beseech you to believe, in a San Francisco paper, Artemus Ward said that when my gorgeous talents were publicly acknowledged by such high authority, I ought to appreciate them myself, leave sagebrush obscurity, and journey to New York with him, as he wanted me to do. But I preferred not to burst upon the New York public too suddenly and brilliantly, so I concluded to remain here. Samuel L. Clemens, Mark Twain, a letter to his mother in Hannibal, Missouri. So you have the appreciation of somebody like Mark Twain, one of his contemporaries, along with Walt Whitman. And I'm going to read you another one now. After Bayard Taylor, the next great commentator on the phenomenon of hashish was the irrepressible Fitz Hugh Ludlow. This little-known bon vivant of 19th century literature began a tradition of pharmo-picturesque literature would find later practitioners in William and Hunter S. Thompson. There is in Ludlow's cannabis reportage a wonderful distillation of all that was zany in the Yankee transcendentalist approach. Ludlow creates a literary persona, not unlike the poet John Shade in Nabokov's Pale Fire, a character who allows us to see deeper into his predicament than he can see himself. Part genius, part madman, Ludlow lies halfway between Captain Ahab and P.T. Barnum, a kind of Mark Twain on hashish. There is a wonderful charm to his free-spirited, pseudo-scientific openness as he makes his way into the shifting dunescapes of the world of hashish. From Terence McKenna, Food of the Gods, The Search for the Original Tree of Knowledge, New York, Bantam. So in the 70s, hashish was my go-to ally. And finding Fitz Hugh Ludlow's book was like perfect synchronicity for me. Reading his book started me on journeys that I had no idea that I would take. But here's the thing. Some of the stories that he tells, as I've said, parallels my own experience. So I know that this is territory that can be marked and traced. And it's also America's very first psychedelic. Hashish taken in a proper amount, usually orally, can take a person to the same place as most any other known entheogens. Different, of course, because it's a different ally, but the space and the state are the same in my viewpoint. It's often ignored now. It's become commercialized with legalization, etc. That's all well and good, but we forget where the source of all this comes from and how it came to be. And Ludlow's work has echoed down over the years, affecting all kinds of different writers, as Crowley, Burroughs, etc. And it's informed us as well. In fact, it's with being the first trip reports, it developed literature in a way that had never been developed before. And his influence is still strong to this day. I'd like to tie this up with a poem. This comes from Cairo from many years ago. Poem praising hashish over wine. Drop the wine and drink from Hadir's lady, which is perfumed with ambergris and is green like chrysolite. It is offered to you by a well-groomed young man in the delicate palm of his hand, as if it were a special mark on a rosy cheek. His outstretched hand reminds you of the tender branches of the elegant plant, moving slowly at the slightest breezes, disseminating its intoxicating aroma, conveying to you by way of your nostrils its exhilarating effect. No wine or other tonic could generate such a heavenly sensation. It is a virgin and not adulterated by water. Nor has it been trodden by feet or squeezed by hand. It has never been mixed in a priest's chalice. It was never outlawed by Muslim rulers, nor was it ever declared unclean by any. Forget your trouble and enjoy your indulgence, and don't leave today's pleasures for tomorrow. Written by Anonymous, which I take as a woman. And this is an Arabic poem praising hashish over wine from the Sufi culture in Egypt. This plant has a long and ancient history, and it has been our companion for thousands upon thousands of years, and should be treated with respect and love as if it were a friend, because indeed it is a friend. And I want to thank you very much for watching my talk today, and bright blessings.